Welcome to Rooted in Love, a podcast where we dive deep into conversations with both healers and social justice leaders who are dedicated to cultivating a world that is truly rooted in love. Join us as we intertwine powerful insights and visionary ideas that inspire us to reimagine what it would look like to truly be in radical, loving community together. My name is Colette Gunim, and I'm a documentary filmmaker that is now venturing into the world of podcasting and social media. I have had this idea after going through my own dark night of the soul and learning so many lessons around the power of healing trauma and wanting to share my own journey of healing trauma and interviewing experts on their own modalities to heal trauma. And then October 7th happened, and as a Palestinian American, I felt compelled to not only be speaking about the importance of healing within ourselves, but healing the world and around the topic of social justice. While it feels like it is extremely crucial to be focusing on stories about Palestine and giving context to the genocide happening in Gaza right now, I also realized that this is not something that's happening in a silo, that decolonization efforts are needed to end the suffering in all various parts of the world, and that our collective liberation is not going to happen if we do not do the liberation work within ourselves. This podcast is intertwining both the healing modalities of the inner work that we have to do in a way that we are able to fully show up, to be of service, and to end the suffering as a collective. It feels like an obligation now more than ever that we need to be building bridges to learn from one another, and that this oppression that we're witnessing throughout the world will not end unless we are able to listen and learn from one another. So today, as part of a two-part series, we are going to learn all about specifically the power of war tax resistance with Kathy Labriola, who has been a war tax resistor for decades. We speak about what war tax resistance is, its impact to stop using our tax dollars towards the military industry complex, and how one can use it as a tool of their own. Thank you for joining us to expand your mind and open your heart towards our collective liberation. This is Rooted in Love.
I've been a vortex resistor for about 45 years, and like most people, I was initially already active in anti-war and peace-related work, and for most people, they become tax resistors because they're already doing work against war, and they feel there's such a contradiction in working against putting so much of your time and love and passion and energy into working against war, but yet you're paying for war with your own taxes. And so most people do eventually come to decide they want to resist taxes in some way. I know for me, at first I was, I'm had a career as an intensive care unit nurse.
Oh, wow.
For about 20 years, and for about the last 30 years, I've been self-employed as a counselor and as a nurse, counselor, and hypnotherapist. And it's a very different experience doing tax resistance when you have an employer and they're taking some of taxes out of your wages. And so in that situation, you can try to reduce the amount they take out of your wages, so that you're, by doing what they call W-4 resistance, you just writing on your W-4 form for your employer that you have more, you want less money taken out, and asking for more exemptions. In other words, you're just saying they want them to take less money out. Then you end up owing the IRS more money at the end of the year, but then you have the option of saying, no, I'm not going to pay it.
I see. Wow.
And if you're self-employed like I am, then you have the option of refusing to pay any of your taxes, and then you certainly owe them a lot, but then you'll have to struggle around that because the IRS will try to collect it, but you have more choices in how much money you can refuse to pay, since there's no one you don't have an employer taking money out of your paycheck. When you have an employer, as I did for many years as a hospital nurse, the IRS also can garnish your wages if you don't pay, but they can only take a small amount each out of each paycheck. And they have a specific formula that they're not allowed to take any more out of your paycheck than would be create a hardship, a financial hardship. So it's a pretty small amount that they can take out of every paycheck. And so some people do still choose to resist taxes. And then if the IRS convinces the employer to garnish your wages, then you still are, they're still paying a little bit at a time, even if it's against your will that they're taking it out, it's a relatively small amount. So
Okay, that makes sense.
um,
Wow, wow. And so for you, like what kind, if you're open to sharing, like what kind of repercussions or like how has the risk been for you on this journey too?
well, there's really no risk involved. I know a lot of people feel there's a risk. There's not really any risk. The only risk is they're going to get their money from you eventually. But if I were a law-abiding, tax-paying citizen, I would have given it to them already. So they're not really
Exactly.
getting anything more from me than
Uh-huh,
I would have just given them voluntarily if
uh-huh,
I paid my taxes.
uh-huh,
There are some small penalties and late fees. It's a pretty small amount. My
uh-huh.
experience is I just take the money that I would owe them and put it in a CD or something and gain some interest on it. By the time they
Ah,
collect on me, usually I'm ahead of the game. Like I've got more money in interest than they're taking in
right.
the extra little penalties. So,
Uh-huh,
um, but that brings me to say there are two key strategies for people in terms of tax resistance, and one is not filing your taxes at all,
yeah.
and the other is filing your taxes and just not paying.
Mhm.
I've always followed the strategy of filing my taxes every year and just not paying. Filing my taxes every year, filling out all those forms, and that I have to fill out the 1040 form, and because I'm self-employed, there are a lot of other forms I have to fill out. And then I always I'd write a letter to them saying, here are my tax forms. This is how much I owe you, and this is why I'm not paying you, because I oppose war and because our country is currently engaged in these wars and is currently supporting these regimes that are oppressing their own people, and et cetera. Just whatever is happening that year, which unfortunately every year there are any number of nations that our country is either at war with or is supplying arms to or is supporting dictatorships in. So, in my case, I usually owe them about $5,000 each
Okay.
year.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes my Social Security because since I'm self-employed, they're not. I have to pay my own Social Security, and includes federal income taxes. So I usually owe them about $5,000 a year. My experience over the years is that there seems to be this magic number somewhere between $20,000 and $25,000. When you owe them that amount, that's when they start to try very hard to collect. And that's when they will eventually put a lien on your bank account. Or if you don't have the money in your bank account, in my case, I have the money in my IRAs, my retirement funds,
Mm-hmm.
which I have money in retirement funds because I am self-employed and I won't be receiving a pension or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so in my case, they will then put a lien on my uh, IRAs and pension funds, and they will take the money out of those funds. Again, as I said, I would have given them that amount by now anyway. So, the last time they collected on me was about 5 years ago, and
Mm-hmm.
at that time, I owed them about $30,000, and they did collect it,
Mm-hmm.
and about $1,000 in late fees and penalties that had built up over the years. So, it usually takes them several years to the point where you owe them enough money that it's worth their time and effort to
Uh-huh.
collect on you.
I
And
see.
I am sure that by the time they collect on me each time, which is usually anywhere between like 6 and 8 years, every like 6 to 8 years, by that time I usually owe them somewhere between 20 and $25,000. In this case, they waited till I owed them 30,000. But uh, if they just wait that long until it's really enough money that it is worth their while. But I'm convinced that it's costs them a lot more than that to actually collect on me. Whatever they get from me, convinced they've spent a lot more money on all the effort and staff time that it took them to collect.
I see. Wow. Wow. Unbelievable. And so like, yeah.
A lot of people don't file at all and just try to avoid the IRS knowing how much money they've made, and so that they feel that maybe they can sort of fly under the radar and then the IRS won't collect on them. And sometimes that does work. That
Wow.
works. It works pretty well for people that have lower incomes or people who get a lot of their income in cash, so that
Mm,
perhaps the IRS would not be as aware of the
I
amount of
see.
money they make.
Yeah, got it. Okay. So haven't faced anything like other than just them going into your accounts and taking the funds out?
What they usually do is every 3 or 4 months you'll get a threatening letter from them,
Uh-huh.
just saying, pay your taxes, you owe us this much, or else we will take all actions necessary to collect the money from you. That's really all they do. And I think a lot of people are intimidated by that. And so they do end up paying
Mm,
just after they get enough of those letters. I get frightened. And, people have said, well, gee, aren't you intimidated or aren't you, and I said, no, I'm not intimidated. I'm just annoyed that I have to keep getting these letters.
ah,
Um, Sometimes some people have said that the IRS has called them and, they get phone calls harassing them to pay.
mhm.
For a couple of years, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, there was my case happened to be assigned to an IRS agent who was, I think, a little more enthusiastic about her job than most of them are. She
Oh, wow.
started coming to my house and knocking on my door to try to talk to me. But because they work 9 to 5, and so do I was always at work when
Yeah,
they
you're out of
came,
your car.
and she would just leave her card and another copy of that threatening letter saying, you have to
Wow.
pay, you owe us this much. And so that was my experience
Mhm.
with them. I try to tell people, everybody thinks the IRS is so big and bad, but they are just another creditor like your credit card company or your if you have a car and you have a car loan, whoever, whatever bank or whoever has your car loan, they're just a creditor and they just want their money like
Yes.
any other creditor, and they will do whatever is cheapest and easiest and fastest to try to get that money from you.
Yeah.
And every now and then you'll happen to get an IRS agent that, like this one that just started coming to my house. I think most people who work for the IRS are just, they're just alienated workers like the rest of us. They're
Yeah.
they just want to
They're
keep the
like
roof over their back.
they're like, okay.
They don't really care whether I pay my taxes or not. They just want to keep their jobs and do as little at work as possible, right? Isn't that what most people do at most jobs? So I just find thinking of it in that way, it's like, well, they don't really, it's not like they're vindictive and like want to get me, they just want their money and they're trying to get it. Like as if I had credit card debt or some other kind of
Mhm.
debt.
Wow. So I guess my next question is around I was part of a webinar where they said like they allocate what would have gone to taxes to go towards like nonprofit organizations or anti-war efforts, that kind of thing. And I guess for you, how you were you donating to other orgs while also having it in the CD too? Like, I guess how did you organize that as well?
Well, I do make a charitable donations every year, but not specifically with the money that I
I
withhold
see.
from
I
taxes.
see.
I have written a few books, nothing to do with tax resistance, but
Okay.
to do with my work, my counseling work, and I get royalty checks from those books every month, and I donate that money to causes that I believe in, that I
Got it.
only wish my tax dollars would be supporting.
Yes.
But I think what you're describing is the People's Life Fund,
Mhm.
that which I am on their board, and I'm very involved in the People's Life Fund. I have not put my funds in the People's Life Fund, but I'm very
Okay.
involved in it.
Mhm.
A lot of vortex resistors will put their money in that fund, and it serves as like an escrow fund, so it's protected. And that way, then the if the IRS is trying to collect on someone and does collect on them, then the People's Life Fund will give them their money back.
Okay.
If the IRS has collected money from them, then that will give their money back to them. But we just donate the interest on the money every year to community organizations. We take grant proposals, and we particularly are trying to support groups that are not going to be able to get any grants from more like foundations or government groups, because they're too radical or too subversive, or because they're small, very small organizations that are not eligible for most grants. They're not, they may not even be incorporated as nonprofits, but are small community-led organizations. So every year we give out grants of up to $5,000 each to each group. I believe this year we're giving, I think we have somewhere between $60,000 and $70,000 that we're going to be granting to various groups.
That's amazing. Wow.
And that's the interest from all the money that we have in the People's Life Fund. We want to show that our tax dollars could be supporting positive change in the community and feeding people and housing people and providing all kinds of care for people. Instead, it's unfortunately going to war.
That is so powerful. And like, yeah, what a transition of funds of where it should be going instead. That's amazing.
Well, it's not only that it's not only that it's actually giving money to these groups that are doing good work, but it's also, for lack of a better word, propaganda. To say it's positive propaganda to say our government has billions of dollars and they could be spending it on this. They're not. Why not?
Wow. I love that so much. That's incredible. I have to look it up because I don't remember them saying about the People's Life Fund, but I'm sure that's what they were talking about for sure, about re-granting out.
There's a way that we can educate the public about this is where your tax dollars are going. This is where maybe they should be going.
Yes.
And we're going to put our money where our mouth is and give people money, give the groups money that really are doing work we support.
Totally. So I guess that leads me to my next question too, is around this idea of like, if they are still coming after you and take the money anyways, then like, how do you feel like it's being able to benefit the anti-war efforts if they're still going to take the funds to go towards military?
Well, as activists, as political activists and organizers, we do lots of things every day, and most of them, we never know what the impact is, if at all. I mean, we've been protesting war, every day for many, many years. And, you could say, well, none of that worked. So why do we do it? Because we protested the war in Iraq for 20 years. We protested the war in Afghanistan for 20 years. It didn't, you couldn't say, well, that really worked well. So the same is perhaps true of tax resistance. I can't say that my withholding my taxes has stopped war.
Yeah.
I wish I could say that, but it's not true. We, as activists and organizers, we do all kinds of political activism and political work and actions, both in our personal lives and in our public work that we do with protests and everything else. And we do it because we feel compelled and called to do it. And we do it because it's the right thing to do. And whether it is 100% effective, we can't really say.
Yes.
But
It's not based
that
on
doesn't mean we should
outcomes.
stop doing it.
Wow. Yeah. It's more about the values of where the money is going versus just like only focused on what are the results that we will achieve.
Well, I also feel that it's a very minuscule number of people that do tax resistance, but we hope that we're modeling that behavior, and we hope we're inspiring other people to stop paying their taxes for war. It doesn't have a huge effect if,
right.
a few thousand people are doing it. But if we can model that behavior and lead by example, if we can somehow inspire or encourage or support other people to do it, it would have a much greater effect. I mean, if the IRS had to work as hard to get their money, tax dollars out of you and everyone else in our community as they do have to work to get the money out of me, they'd never be able to wage war.
Wow. So yeah, I guess that's the thing. Like if there was masses, like let's say like hundreds of thousands of people that are doing war tax resistance, what do you feel like would be the effect of that if it was in that level?
if it were a mass movement, the IRS wouldn't really be able to effectively collect taxes, and they wouldn't be able to give, 60% of every tax dollar to the Pentagon to wage war.
Mhm, mhm, mhm,
Make it a lot harder for our
mhm,
government to wage war on any country or to, build nuclear weapons or to, manufacture weapons.
mhm. Um, one of the challenges that I heard back was this idea that they could potentially just, like, print more money, like, they could just, like, create money since if they're not getting it from the citizens. I'm wondering if you've heard that before too, as a challenge.
I certainly heard that, but I mean, printing money just creates more inflation because
Mhm,
there's more dollars out there that are worth less and less. So
mhm.
it doesn't really help anyone.
That's true, that's true. Okay, yes, that's amazing. I love that. Yeah, this is why this is just so essential. This idea of, like, just making it as challenging as possible so that these funds cannot be collected versus only of course, protests are useful for, like, visibility and mobilizing, but that this is where it feels like we can get to the root, cause, which is the money. For people who are nervous or afraid or hesitant, including me, that I'm like, I have no idea what journey is about to, like, unfold by going into this world. Like, what kind of advice would you give if you are just starting out, where to start, like, the low-hanging fruit of getting into tax resistance too?
That's a great question, and I'm so glad you asked because um, we often will encourage people to uh, start by just deducting a very small, kind of symbolic amount of
Uh-huh.
money from your taxes and sending a letter to the IRS saying that for instance, we often say start with say 10%. Just
Mhm,
say, well, I owe you this amount. I'm withholding 10% as a protest against war and against the fact that so much of my tax dollars are going to be spent for war. During the first few years of the Iraq War, 2003 till about 2006, the Code Pink Women for Peace, a group that I'm also involved in, had a really successful campaign. Unfortunately, it kind of fizzled out after a few years. A really great campaign urging people to refuse to pay 7% of their taxes for war because their analysts estimated that 7% of every tax dollars was going to pay for the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan. And so the Women for Peace, Code Pink Women for Peace was encouraging people to refuse to pay that 7% and make a point of sending a letter to the IRS and protesting publicly saying, I'm withholding 7% because I don't support these two wars and that's what that 7% is being spent on. It was also a way of educating the public that wow, 7% of every tax dollar you pay is going to these two wars that you probably don't support and
wow.
probably actively are opposing.
Mhm. Did it go, like, viral? Like, were there a lot of people that participated?
There were a lot of people participating in it. It kind of fizzled out after a couple of years, I think mainly because, Code Pink is so active in public protests and other
Yeah.
kinds of anti-war activism that it wasn't really their usual thing, and they didn't really follow through on it after more than a couple of years. And I don't think they ever did enough. At a national level, they never did enough sort of analysis to figure out well, how many thousands of women actually did this? We
Right.
had lots of anecdotal reports from women emailing, calling, writing, saying, I'm withholding this 7%. But we really never knew how many people actually participated in it. So we weren't able to, sort of
Okay.
utilize that for the, propaganda
Mhm.
purposes to oppose the war. Uh,
Wow.
so I wish it would have gone on farther, and I would hope that that's a lesson for us today that we could start another campaign similar to that. Like, well, how much of your tax dollars is going to support Palestinian genocide, or how much of your tax dollars is being sent to Israel in that $3.8 billion in aid every year? what's the percentage, and there could be a campaign to withhold that amount.
Wow. Yes. I think it would be so powerful. And even as like, once again, the statement politically, but then also economically, that it could be very, very effective. So this is so helpful. And I know they're doing there is like a tax blackout 2024, like there is a campaign starting.
Right,
So
I think that's only 5%. They're asking people to withhold 5%. And I think that's a fantastic idea. I've been, hearing about that and saying, yeah, we really should participate in, getting people information about that. Because whether it's 5%, whether it's the 7% with Code Pink, or whether it's the 10% that we often suggest, the IRS is very, very unlikely to come after you and try to collect on you. Because it's such a small amount, unless you're rich, which I'm certainly not. 5%, 7%, 10%, it's a pretty small amount of your taxes for the year or 2023, or whatever year it is. And so it's not worth it to them. It costs them way too much money to try to collect that, because, they have to get an attorney to write up a thing, to put a levy on your bank account, and they've got to file that in court. I mean, it's they have to go through a lot in order to get money out of they can't just walk into your bank and say, give us that money. So it's not worth it to them to go through that. So it's a very low risk activity to say, I'm withholding 5%. And I understand that for a lot of people, and I think especially poor people, working people, and people of color, it's a frightening thing to go up against your government, or like a big organization like the IRS that seems so frightening and so powerful. And there's just a lot of fear around that, and for a lot of good reasons. But it is, I could say with some certainty that it's a pretty low risk activity, and you'll be very unlikely to have any kind of consequences. It's not going to affect your credit rating, and it's not going to keep you from renting an apartment, or your landlord is not going to find out, oh, you owe $200 to the IRS. It's such a small amount that it's not going to make a difference.
totally. Okay, that's amazing. Okay, this is so helpful. Thank you so much.
We really encourage that. They just have made a new one just in the last couple months that is way, way more up to date than anything you'll find on the People's Life Fund or Northern California War Tax Resistance website. We try to keep our website up, but there's nothing on our website that's nearly as up to date as theirs. And they do have a website with lots of different webinars and tutorials about different aspects of war tax resistance. For instance, as I mentioned, a lot of people file their taxes like I do, and just refuse to pay and send a letter saying why they're not paying. Lots of people don't file at all. There's more risk in some ways involved in not paying at all, because there could be an interpretation legally that is tax evasion as opposed to tax resistance. So we want people to get as much education as they can, and information about whatever risks are involved before they take any action.
Yeah. And this is why I'm like, yeah, the idea of like documenting your story and like getting more content that is more simplified for us to understand. Cause like, yeah, I've been on the website and I watched a webinar, and yet still I'm like, oh boy, like I'm like entering a whole world. I'm like, I need to talk to somebody like has actually done this. So it's super helpful for us to be like, okay, step number one, let's just like start small for our first year, and then we can start to build as a community and like as a society altogether of how to do this work. Especially for like, yeah, our generation, and like working through Instagram, TikTok, that we can start to build these platforms out for tax.
Yeah. Mhm. Well, and I think it's important that, National War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee does also have actual staff,
Yeah.
as opposed to most of the other war tax resistance groups like ours are very small, all volunteer groups.
Yeah.
And so they actually do have staff. You can actually call them and say, I'm thinking of doing war tax resistance. I need advice, and, we'll answer your questions.
Wonderful.
And, because for so many people, they're just so reluctant to take action unless they can get their questions answered. So
Totally. That it's terrifying for sure that you're like, if you're first starting out, they're like, there is no way I'm messing with the IRS. And so seeing that, like, oh yeah, people are doing it and they're still fine. Like they're surviving. They're not in jail. You're okay.
right, and they certainly don't want to put you in jail because, I mean, the IRS can't put you in jail anyway. I mean, they're not a
Right.
court.
Right.
But and they certainly don't want to put you in jail because then you can't work and pay your taxes. If you're in jail, you can't pay the money you owe them. You're not able to pay them, so they want you to pay. That's all they care about. Especially now they've been so understaffed. Particularly, ironically, as much as we all hate Donald Trump, he underfunded the IRS because he didn't want them coming after his rich buddies to
Wow.
make them pay. All of those rich people,
Wow.
they don't pay their taxes, and he underfunded them for that. But strangely enough, one little weird side effect is less war tax resistors are being aggressively collected on by the IRS because they're so understaffed. They don't have the
Wow.
people power to do it. So I'm sure that wasn't his intention.
Yes, yes, but it worked. Unbelievable. Wow. That's really incredible. Yeah, it gives a lot more I feel much more secure after hearing your story and like all of this advice. So thank you so much for taking
They're
the
very big. The IRS is just this huge, very confused, very kind of Byzantine, disorganized kind of bureaucracy. And I kind of think of them like the DMV, but only bigger and less efficient.
Wow.
And they
Terrible.
just really don't have their act together at all. So,
Wow.
and
Wow.
that's part of the reason that so many people that just never even file their taxes,
Go under the radar.
no, the IRS forgets they exist. People just
Wow.
stop filing their taxes, and it seems like for years on end it can work for them for decades. I know people that for decades haven't filed their taxes, and I mean
Unbelievable.
IRS just they are not keeping very good track of people.
That's wild.
We have this fear that we're living in a police state, and to some extent we are in this surveillance state. We really are. But a group like the IRS, they can't keep track of even
Yeah.
where you live or whether you paid taxes since 2002. So
Wow. Unbelievable. Yeah. And I'm like thinking about how to right, like the percentages for myself and like, okay, do I want to like just go for it or not? Like, should I start at the 5% and work my way up? Like for me, I'm single, I don't have children, so I'm like, I really, like I don't really have any dependents. I could do it if I wanted to. The one thing that I'm fearful of is that I read about the passport and that if you get a certain like up to like what I think it was like 60,000 that you can lose your ability to renew your passport until you pay something like that. That I was like,
yeah, we've heard a rumor about them, but we have never heard of anyone who actually had
oh
that
really?
happen to them. Yeah, and in fact, I was just teaching a vortex resistance workshop to a group about a month ago, and someone brought that up, and the other person that was teaching it with me was saying, well, I haven't. I've been refusing taxes for 20 years or something, and I've just renewed my passport and I didn't have any problem. I just renewed my passport a year ago or something, and I didn't have any problems. So I don't know if that's true or
Yeah,
if it's more of a rumor. Uh,
interesting.
one question that we haven't been able to answer is, you know, how would this affect if someone is an undocumented immigrant and they're on a pathway of asylum or on a pathway towards citizenship? If
Yeah.
they were war tax resistors, would this affect that pathway? And would that be used as an excuse to keep them from becoming citizens or from gaining, a green card or something? We don't know the answer to that because we just haven't had enough experience with. We just have not really known any people in that situation who have chosen to become tax resistors. So I think that's probably the only question we've ever been asked that we haven't been able
That's the
to
one that's like, all right, like might
answer.
be a little bit riskier, but who knows, right? That like if you know people that have done that. Interesting.
Yeah, we don't know anyone who's been in that situation that has been a war tax resistor, but it certainly is something to be concerned about. That if
Totally.
that the government could potentially use any excuse. I mean, they probably could use any excuse to try, and they probably do use whatever excuses they could come up with to prevent people from, getting that green card or becoming citizens or just that the anti-immigrant, hostility in our government.
That's true. Have you done any kind of workshops with like Palestinian groups in the Bay Area? around war tax resistance or anything yet?
We haven't really been approached by any groups so far to do that.
But you'd be open to like giving session, like you lead sessions as well, informational.
Yeah, I mean, before the pandemic, we used to have a lot of these workshops, right? In January, February, March, right when people are doing their taxes. That's the time
Yes.
people are thinking about taxes. But with the pandemic, we stopped doing them in person, and we've done some on Zoom. We haven't done any in person since then. And
Okay. I have contacts at these organizations, so this may be something that like if you're interested and open to like sharing, I think this is something that we all really need to learn. So it would be really great to be able to partner somehow.
Okay. Yeah, and I think the only public event that we're going to be having is on tax day, when we give away the money, and that is also it can be very educational for people because we'll be talking a lot at that event. A lot of people will be giving presentations about war tax resistance. So
Yes, thank you so much. I'm truly so inspired by your bravery and courage and
uh,
just like living
well,
to your
there's
values.
nothing brave about it. There's no really, I don't see any risk except they're getting some money from me that I would have given them willingly if I, as I've said, if I was a law-abiding citizen, which I'm not. So what's your new documentary on? And then I'm going to have to sign off here.
Incredible. Yes, no worries. It's called Traces of Home, and it
Oh,
follows the journey of me returning to Mexico and Palestine to find my parents' original homes that they were forced to
wow.
as children. And then it begins to unpack intergenerational trauma and how the trauma is like, passed down within us and how it affected my sense of home and disconnect to home growing up here.
Oh, wow. Wow, that sounds really exciting and really, I'm sure, very painful as well as exciting for you
Yes,
to
yes.
look
But it
into.
sounds right, like in your other world of like therapy and mental health. Yes, it's very much rooted in this like healing journey of trauma. So yes, I would love to find ways to continue to be in touch.
Okay.
For sure.
All right. Well, great talking with you. Thanks so much for making the time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Rooted in Love featuring Kathy Labriola. It truly means so much for you to spend your time listening in and learning about war tax resistance and what we can do to make sure we use our voice to end the injustice and genocide that continues to rampage on with our tax dollars. If you'd like to learn more about war tax resistance, you can find helpful links in the show notes, as well as more about Kathy. Feel free to share this episode with a friend, subscribe, and leave a rating for future interviews. And you can follow me for updates on future episodes on Instagram at Coco's Sanctuary, which is also in the show notes. The next episode will be a part 2 around war tax resistance, learning from another war tax resistor who has been resisting for decades since the Vietnam War. Until then, thank you for listening in.